Turn this evening to the book of Job and to the opening verses of chapter 23. And I'll read just from the first verse down through to verse 6. Job chapter 23 from verse 1 and through to verse 6. Job answered and said, "Even today is my complaint bitter. My stroke is heavier than my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say unto me. Will he plead against me with his great power? No, but he would put strength in me." Now, I'm sure you're all familiar with the book of Job in general terms, in the sense, particularly the opening chapter or two, where Job is described as being this most righteous man of God, and the Lord was seemingly particularly pleased with him. He spoke in glowing terms of Job when Satan appeared among the sons of God in the presence of God. And the Lord says to him, "Hast thou considered my servant Job? There is none more righteous in all the earth." Now, what a commendation, even from the Lord himself. But we know from those opening chapters that Satan was permitted to tempt and not only to tempt, but to come with hard circumstances into the life of Job. You see, Satan was convinced that Job only feared God for his blessings. Take from him this, take from him that, and then see what Job thinks of God and how Job lives before God. Well, the Lord gives permission for Satan to bring hard times into the life of Job, and in quick succession he loses his family, and he loses his fortune, and then he loses his health. And he's in a very difficult place. The most righteous man in all the earth, and yet God permits all these things to be taken from him. Now, you would think, would you not, that this would be more than enough to crush any spirit. That if you had so much, and you knew that you were in the favour of God, that suddenly for all of this to come against you, for the whole of your world to collapse around you, that you would be crushed indeed and lost as to what to do and where to turn. Certainly in the world, if someone lost everything in that outward kind of way, in such quick succession, you'd probably be reading about it in the newspapers, this disaster that has come to this particular individual. They had so much and now they're ruined. Well, such was the lot of Job, but what's very remarkable as you read through the book, and it comes out very clearly in chapter 23, is what disturbed Job more than anything else was not so much the loss of his family or his fortune or his health, but the loss of the sense of the presence of God. And when you read chapter 23, it seems quite clear that that mattered to him more than anything else. And there's an important lesson in all of this, isn't there? Because in our human weakness, we might well be tempted to think to ourselves, well, if God has allowed all of this loss to come to me, I've lost my family and I've lost my fortune and I've lost my health, and even my wife is seeking to undermine my faith, curse God and die. So there's no spiritual harmony in the home. Everything everywhere is falling apart for him. Yet when you read chapter 23, the one thing that disturbs him more than anything else is that God seems to have withdrawn himself. Now, for us, this is what I was going to say, and I lost my train of thought there, but for us, we might think if everything was gone like that God has a grievance with us, that we must have done something to incur his anger, that he would so permit such things to happen against us. And we, no doubt, if we were honest, would be craving for all that we had lost to be restored to us. Can I not have my family back? Well, they're dead, so that might be out of the question. Can I not have my wealth restored, at least in portion? Can I not have my health restored? Can I not have spiritual unity in the home with my wife restored? That's what we'd be thinking of. But chapter 23 of Job, the one thing that he seems to have lost and the one thing that eclipses everything else in his scale of importance, where is God? Where is God? He wants to draw near to God, but where is God? And that's really the theme of this chapter. We're only going to look at the first 6 verses 2 to 6 particularly. But when we look at all of this, we see a man in tremendous spiritual turmoil. He complains, and his suffering is a very bitter experience. But as I say, the greatest thing so far as he's concerned is to recover a sense of the presence of God. So look at Job's spiritual turmoil, first of all, in verses 2 to 5. And then, in the midst of all of this, when we come to verse 6, we can see a recovery of hope and a sense that in the midst of all of this, God will be found in some way. So Job's spiritual turmoil, verses 2 to 5. Today, even today, is my complaint bitter. Now, a complaint is something that you would normally speak, but a complaint spoken is an expression of what is already there in the heart and in the mind, in the emotions. And here is a man who has very dark feelings of very deep distress in a time when everything seemed to be against him. And we may know something of what Job felt here when something comes into life and it just concerns us and it overloads us with distress and fear and worry, and we can't help thinking about it. It rolls around in the mind over and over and over again, and you can't seem to break out of it. My complaint, the dark feelings of very deep distress in Job's mind, that then comes out as a complaint. Now, a complaint is something that you speak. You might speak it to someone, or you might speak it to God, or it might remain as an unspoken reaction to what's going on, a complaint. You know, the kind of thing that we say, why? Or why me? Or why now? Why this? And all of these things that come from the feelings and the emotions within. My complaint, says Job, my complaint is bitter. You know how something can be bitter to the taste. And when you taste something and the taste of it surprises you, the taste of it is abhorrent to you, the first thing that you want to do is to get it from out of your mouth so that you don't have to endure that bitter taste anymore. And this is the experience of Job. It's so bitter, it's so dark, it's so hard, and he wants to be rid of it, if at all possible. It's heavy to bear, too much to bear. In fact, he goes on to say, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. Imagine this man, he's lost everything, he's in pain with these great ulcers, as it were, that have come across his body, and his wife isn't with him, and God is distant from him. And he says, my stroke is heavier than my groaning. You can imagine him sitting there groaning. You ever groaned? You know, where you can't put your emotions into words. All you can do is to moan and to groan and to groan in the presence of God, as it were. But Job would say that my stroke, in other words, my feelings, the sense of distress at the loss of everything, and particularly the loss of God's presence, is more than even my groanings can express. He cannot find the words, but even if he could, the sense of suffering that he's going through is worse than those words could ever say. You know, the Apostle Peter talks about joy unspeakable and full of glory. Well, here Job is saying there is distress unspeakable and full of misery. And then he goes on in verse 3 to express this longing for God. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat, to be where God is. And as I say, this seems very much to be the worst thing of all concerning Job. He wants to know the comforts of God's presence, but he cannot seem to draw near unto God. Oh, that I knew where I might find him. Find him, that means not locate him in that sense, but come face to face with him. That's the meaning of the term there. And we know the difference, don't we? You can go through a kind of mechanical exercise of worship. You can sing the hymns, you can read the scriptures, you can listen to a sermon, you can read a book at home or whatever it is, and yet it's all very dry and dull and mechanical. And where is God in this? And on the other hand, we know what it is when we sense in a very indescribable but tangible way that God is near. And I'm not suggesting we become mystics, but you know how that God seems to speak through his word. And we have a sense that God is hearing our prayers. And there's that inexpressible, almost incomprehensible sense that God is in this place. But Job didn't know any of that, but he longed for it. This holy, righteous man had known, no doubt, so much of it in his life, and it seems to have gone along with everything else. And that's what he wants to discover, to meet face to face with the living God, not know of him or about him, not simply remember him from the past, but to meet with him in the present, face to face. Now, it's true that God is always with his people. That's just a fact. And he's faithful to us to the end. The thing is that he does not always let us feel it. We don't sense it as we would wish to do. And in such times, the effect of the comforting promise seems to have disappeared. They've been wonderful promises in the past, but they don't seem to be wonderful so much in the present. And that sense of peace and joy seems to have departed. And the sense of the divine favour and divine love is not once it was. And that sense of thankfulness and indebtedness unto God is not what it once was. And praise and thanksgiving seems to be hard work. And try as we may, he seems to be absent. And it's then that doubts and fears can set in. And as Job cries, "Oh, that I knew where I might find him." Well, we might say, well, surely Job did know. He did know how he might meet face to face with God. And of course, in a sense, he did. He was a man that worshipped God. He was a man of prayer, no doubt. He was a man of great faith. He was a man who knew the kind of worship that God appointed, and he would approach God in God's own appointed way. But you get the impression that all these familiar spiritual exercises seemed to avail nothing. And that's how it can be with a Christian at times. We know where to find him. We know where to find him in his word. We meet with him there. We know that we can find him and meet with him in the exercise of prayer. We know that we can find him and meet with him in the conduct of a service of worship in the house of God. We know where to go to find him in that sense. But even though we know where to go, when we go, we cannot seem to meet with him face to face as our hearts desire to do. And Job longs for this face-to-face meeting with God. Now I have to say this, that when believers are in that state, when God seems to be vague and distant, and the word seems to be dull, and prayer seems to be hard, and worship seems to be empty, that you begin to wonder, am I a Christian? Am I a Christian? Why does God withdraw himself like this? Why are these things that the scriptures and prayer and worship, why is it that it's so dull? It's not like once it was, and certainly it's not like how it ought to be. What does that say about me? But you long for God. Now, at such a time, when worship is hard and prayer and so on and so forth, the fact that there is a longing heart speaks volumes. A worldling would hardly know the difference. And the worldling wouldn't care very much. The worldling would just go on, wondering about things perhaps, wanting, if he was in Job's position, oh, I wish I could have my family back and my health and my wealth, and I wish things were better in my marriage, that kind of a thing. But whether God was present or whether God wasn't wouldn't mean very much. And so, in a very strange way, when God seems to be distant, but we long for God, that is an evidence to hold on to at such a time as we might be tempted to think that we're not believers at all. The fact that we long for him, that says it. That does it. And it should be a great comfort to us. It shows a genuine faith. And when God is absent from us, we just run after him until we find him. That's what you find in the Song of Solomon. You know, where the bride is visited by the groom, and the groom comes knocking on the door, and the bride doesn't want to get up to meet the groom, and when she eventually does, he's gone. And she goes around the city and saying to the watchman of the city, have you seen my beloved? If you see him, tell him that I love him. See, the same parallel thing, isn't it? That the true believer longs for her Saviour, longs to be in that real, vital, meaningful relation with him. Can't bear to be absent from the Lord. Such was the case with Job. Such is the case with every true believer when these experiences may come. And then look at verses 4 and 5. I would order my cause before him. Now you have to link that to what's been said in verse 3. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. And verse 4, connected with that, says, if I could, I would order my cause before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say unto me. I would, but I can't. I would because I don't sense that God is with me and present with me. I would if only I could sense that he hears my prayer. And if I could sense that, then this is what I would do. I would order my cause before him. That means to say that he would set out his case. All of his feelings, all of his distresses, all of the events that have happened to him, all of his longings for God, all of his inquiries, all of his misgivings, all of his misunderstandings, all of his inquiries that go on in his mind, all of these things, I would set them all out before God. I have told you once that, it's not a most apt illustration, but I once worked with a man many, many years ago who was often complaining that he wasn't paid enough. Sound familiar? And he told me that he was going to go in to see the boss and he was going to take in all his bills, his monthly bills, and spread them out on the desk and then put next to that his pay slip and say, now, how do you expect me to live? You see, that's what he did. He set everything out before that man and said, now look, I'm appealing to you to help me. That's what Job was doing. Look, all these things have happened to me, and you've withdrawn. And how can I live in such a state? And if only he could come and sense that he was praying and communing and meeting with God in that real face-to-face way, this is what he would do, and set out before him his case. No doubt also Job would set out from an honest heart the weakness of his faith and of his sins, all of these things, and plead before the Lord. And he goes on to say, I would fill my mouth with arguments. That doesn't mean to say that he would quarrel with God and accuse God of being unjust. But he would fill his mouth with arguments in the sense that, here are the reasons, O Lord, that I expect grace and mercy from thee. Thou art a God who loves mercy. Thou art a God who is faithful to thy promises. Look at the reproach of my friends and of the world who look at me as being a child of God, and they see these things happen and they don't understand, and they misrepresent me and they misrepresent God. And included in these words, I would know the words which he would answer me and understand what he would say is the spirit of submission. See, not quarreling and arguing, but accepting whatever it is that God would respond to his complaint, to his argument. I would know. I would accept whatever he might say to me. I would. I wouldn't reject it. I wouldn't argue with him in that sense. I would accept it. If he rebukes me for my sin or for my complaints, I would accept that. If he tells me that I need to wait and to be patient, I would accept that. If he even tells me that he won't tell me, but just to trust him, I'd accept that. Whatever it is he will say, I will accept it, because I just long to meet with him face to face and to know afresh that I am under his divine favour. You see how this is a man for whom God is everything. Everything. Oh, he's lost everything else. But what he craves is to know that God looks upon him with his favour. And isn't that how all of us ought to be? It questions, doesn't it, what really matters in life. We love our families. We're thankful for God's provisions, homes and all the rest, provisions in that sense. We're thankful for our health, even though we might wish it were a bit better than it is at times. We value all of those things, but do we value our knowledge of God the more? That's a true Christian. How we fail in that respect. How we fail, how when things come against us, we pray, Lord, bring that back. Remove this burden from me. Help me that life may return to its happy state again. Take all these troubles away so that I can go on more joyfully, with less burdens to bear. That's how often we pray, isn't it? But is the knowledge of God the all-surpassing thing? And if we lost that, would that be the thing that crushed us the most? Well, here is Job longing to be in the presence of God. And yet in the midst of this, and he returns to that theme later in the chapter, we haven't got time to consider that, but in verse 6, there's this glimmer of hope, and there is this little bit of reviving that surely the Lord brings to Job's heart and experience. He says in verse 6 then, "Will he plead against me with his great power? No, but he would put strength in me." Will he plead against me with his great power? That's the voice, to begin with, of uncertainty and of a sense of dread of the immeasurable holiness and greatness of God. What he means by that is, will God bring all of his power to bear against me and crush me altogether? Were I to find God, were I to come to meet face to face with the living God, would he come against me and summon all his mighty power and crush me altogether? I feel broken now, but if I were to meet him, would he have done with me once and for all? Would he bring the power of his holiness against me, to disdain to know a worm like me? A worm that complains about one thing and another. Would he just crush me altogether by the power of his holiness? Would he bring against me the power of his law against my sin and make me feel even more wretched than I do already? Would he bring against me the power of his justice and put me to death and everlasting misery? Will he therefore humiliate me and crush my spirit and remove all my hopes? And Job, as it were, says those words, and it's as though he stops and he pauses and he thinks before he says, no. Because that is not the nature of God. No. Do we feel at times that God must be against us? Do we feel so spiritually bereft and empty that God has left us, abandoned us, and there's no spiritual future for us? Search as we may, try as hard as we can, looking into the Word and into the means of grace that are appointed for us, and yet where is God? And we may not have articulated in the words, but if we did meet with God, would it just be that he would dismiss us altogether and say that you were never a child of mine, I don't want to know you, be out of my presence, be done with you, be away with you? No. Not for the soul that longs for God, that nevertheless trusts his word of promise, that hates the sin that may have driven God from him, and just longs to know that forgiving grace and that infilling of the love of God. No. It must be the sweetest no that ears ever heard. Job says God is not of that sort. He would not bring his power against me. Rather, he would put his strength in me. In other words, that power that I dread that might crush me altogether will not be used to crush me altogether, but that power will be put into my soul that I might be able to go on in spiritual life, looking for the day, waiting for the day, hoping for the day, expecting the day to come when God will appear, when all my fears will be put to flight, when this dread absence of God will come to an end. He will put his strength in me. Strength to believe, Strength to trust him even when he seems to have withdrawn his favour and his presence. Or how often true faith, and I say that advisedly, true faith may stumble, but God puts strength into that faith. That's what he's doing for Job here. And in the moments of this verse, Job is thinking not of what God seems to be by dint of the experience that he's going through, but he's thinking about what God actually is toward his believing people. The God who is filled with pity and compassion and kindness and tenderness and faithfulness. The one who is the ever-loving Father who never ceases to love his children. It doesn't feel like that, but that's the fact of it. God may have withdrawn himself, but God remains God, and that union has never been altered. He will not plead against me with his great power, no, but rather he would put strength in me to believe these things, to know these things, to bear the trials his wisdom appoints. He would put his strength in me. Remember that promise in Deuteronomy 33, as thy days, so shall thy strength be. Day by day, God grants to us the strength that we need for the day. He doesn't give us a great reservoir that we carry around with us through the rest of our lives, but he dispenses it day by day by day, and as we need, so he supplies. He would put strength in me to bear the trials his wisdom appoints, to continue in Christian life and duties. Be not weary in well-doing, says the apostle. And we often feel like saying, how? How can we not be weary in well-doing? He will put his strength in me, is the answer. And just one more final thought before I finish. He will put his strength in me when our days in this world are finished and we are brought finally into our heavenly home. He will put his strength in me. Why? I say this: to bear the weight of glory and blessing that heaven holds for us. I don't think that as we are, we could endure such a place with all of its holiness and the sight of Christ and the glory that prevails there. I think the sight of such a place would be the end of us. But he puts his strength in me to bear the weight that we shall know of the love of God, of the fellowship that we shall enjoy with Christ. See, Paul said in 2 Corinthians 4, he compared our light affliction, which is but for a moment. It worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. It's all out of proportion, you see. And we need strength for the trials here, but we need his strength to enjoy and to appreciate and even to live through that which he's prepared for us. Is God against a true believer from whom he's withdrawn? Will he put forth or plead against me with his great power? No, 1,000 times no. He would put strength in me. And Job has this flash from heaven, as it were, that supports him from that time. And he goes on through this book with all of the well-meaning but very unhelpful and even hurtful comments that his friends bring from time to time, until at the end of the book, God breaks through once again. Oh yes, he restores his health and he restores his fortune and he gives him a new family, as it were. But the great thing that Job declares at the end of the book, after all of this experience, is that before my ear had heard him, but now my eye seeth him. He brought him through. Where is he? Oh, that I knew where I might find him. Well, by the time you get to the end of the book, there is God in all his grace, and so very near, and even more precious than ever he had been before. Go through those dark times now and again, spiritual turmoil, all linked sometimes to the turmoil of events in life. We all have these things from time to time. Life, the Christian life, is not some steady ascent from conversion to glory. It is rather like a wavy line graph that goes up and then it goes down, and it goes up and it goes down. And we're affected by so many things, and God is over all things, and God has his way with us. But as we long for God, so he will ultimately reveal himself to us, and we will know not only where we might find him, but we shall know that by his grace and mercy we have found him, because there he is. May the Lord help us and strengthen our faith through all these trials in our lives for his glory. Amen.